My name is Mark, and in this Zen Talk, we're going to be talking about religious exemption. So, in the news, and probably anybody who is currently employed in the United States, you may have been hearing a lot about this talk about a religious exemption. And this needs to be explained a little bit because I'm getting some questions about what is a religious exemption and how exactly does this thing work and where does it come from. So, the religious exemption is really coming from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is this right here, and you can Google this. Just type in Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it'll bring up the entire act and all of the commentaries and pretty much the breakdown of what the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is about. So basically, this act protects your constitutional rights that can, in where you cannot be discriminated for race, your skin color, your religion, your gender, or your national origin. So, who has to follow these? So, in the United States, irregardless of any local, city, or county, or state law that might say otherwise, all employers, that is, private businesses and government, have to follow this. Any establishment that is open to the public, with the exception would be private clubs. And of course, all government services have to follow this, have to follow the Civil Rights Act. So violators can be fined heavily by the government. They can be sued in court for damages. And this has happened a lot. There's long case histories of government or the employers or establishment open to the public who refuses to serve based on discrimination. And these people have lost and they have paid heavy for their discriminations. So, what are the most relevant parts of the Civil Rights Act of 1964? Well, basically, it would be Title II, which would be the public accommodations, and these would be things like hotels, restaurants, stores, places where people would go. This could also include theaters and stadiums. The next one is Title IV, which would be the education. This would be your K through 12 or any college that accepts federal money. If it's a private college that does not accept any money whatsoever from the government, like Hillsdale, they would not fall under Title IV. But any education system or education institution that accepts any money from the federal government would have to follow Title IV. And Title VII, which is all employers in the United States, including government employers. So you are exempt. You already have a religious exemption that is granted to you by the Civil Rights Act. And all you have to do is inform your employer of your exemption. So let's give an example that of an exemption that maybe you may have to inform your employer about. So let's say the employer changes their business model or is demanding that you do something, either a action or some sort of process that would violate your sincerely held religious beliefs. And this would be a sincerely held religious belief would be something where you have the belief of a religious belief, and the employer is asking you to do something, asking you to engage in something, asking you to perform something which would violate that. So, let's just say, for an example, the employer chose to change their business model, and now they're going to sell weapons of war. Now, I have a sincerely held religious belief that uh, would prevent me from the engaging of selling of weapons of war. I will not sell to the general public guns or knives or things that they can go use to murder and kill people with. So if my employer said, well, we're going to change our model and we're going to do this, and I would say, well, I can't do that. I'm informing you of my religious exemption from that particular action. And you can find something else for me to sell. I can sell anything else the company is selling except any instrument or accessory that would be enabling war, for weapons and weaponry. So the employer, they cannot, go back to this, they cannot demand proof of my religion. They can't say, well, show me proof of your religion. Show me that you actually believe in this thing that you're talking about. They really cannot ask for that. I've informed them of my sincerely held religious belief, and that's all I have to do. I don't have to explain to them. They can't demand proof. They can't judge or validate my beliefs. They can't put me on trial. They can't ask me to come into a meeting and explain it to their satisfaction. And that is not possible, and that is not what they're there for. And actually, that would be against the Civil Rights Act to have to do that. They can't harass me, demand that I have interactive meetings about the subject, or debate my beliefs. So essentially, once I've made once I have informed my employer of my religious exemption, they have to accommodate me in some ways. Maybe move me to a different division, maybe move me to something else. There's a lot of ways they can accommodate me. So the accommodations with the employer, they have to be within reason. They cannot single you out like wearing a badge or such. They cannot ask you to do things that they're not asking all the employees to do. They cannot humiliate you or degrade you or ask you to humiliate yourself or degrade yourself. And they cannot treat you differently from the other employees. Now, the employer may declare that the accommodation is unreasonable and may move to terminate you. This is actually an illegal action on their part. Most of the time, I mean, if the employer is trying to say that they would have to make such unreasonable accommodations that would greatly cost them more than your employment, they would have to document that heavily. And I'll tell you right now, that'll probably get knocked back in any hearing or court case, and they generally don't win those battles. Now, you should also not make any unreasonable demands on the employer. Like, you shouldn't be asking them to be building you a new office or put you in a different building that they don't own, or go to such great expenses and accommodations that would make it unprofitable for them. All right, so if you choose to submit a religious exemption, you're simply going to inform them in writing, just a simple letter is sufficient, that you are exempt to whatever they're asking you to do due to your sincerely held religious beliefs. And again, you do not need to explain your beliefs, though you can for courtesy reasons, and I would just make it short and simple. You do not need to show proof. You do not need a letter from your religious leader. You do not need to cite any passages from any religious book at all. Nothing. You do not have to belong to any organized religion, church, or temple. You do not have to show any personal history with the religious belief. You can convert and change your religion at any time and as frequently as you want. So, with submitting any thing in writing about your sincerely held religious belief, you do not want to make any of the following. Do not make any political statements in your religious example. In other words, don't be talking about the New World Order, conspiracy theory, space aliens, or anything like that. Do not make any scientific or medical claims or statements thereof. Don't be talking about any science. You don't want to be talking about any of that stuff. And do not make personal opinions about the employer, about the government, about society, or whatever it is like that. Just keep your statement sweet and simple to the religious exemption that you're talking about. And if your employer wants to bring up these issues, just tell them that is really not something that you want to talk about, because that's not the issue at hand. So this basically keep your statement on your sincerely held religious beliefs and nothing else. So some other steps that you may need to that may happen to you. So if your employer chooses to harass you, they just keep coming up to you and asking questions, or they try to treat you differently suddenly, so they harass you. This could be things like unwelcome phone calls or unwelcomed questions, or they're nitpicking, or they're asking you, well, what other religious beliefs, or what other things, or they may say, well, if you don't want to be touching weapons, well, then what about a steak knife? That's would be harassment, and you can say to them gee, like what you're doing. The questions you're asking me sounds like, I'm feeling like I'm being harassed by you, and that should be enough to tell them to back off. They cannot create a hostile work environment, or put you in a hostile work environment, or change your environment so that it's hostile. They can't deny your exemption. They simply cannot deny this. If they choose to deny it, they're choosing to go against the law. And if they choose to fire you, then they're choosing to go against the law. So you would basically file a complaint with the EEOC, your state civil rights division, and the Federal Department of Justice. And you probably also will want to retain an attorney and sue your employer for damages if they choose to fire you. They may try to make your environment hostile. They may try to get you to resign. Don't do any of that stuff. So basically, if you do the filings, if you have to go through this process, these are all winnable actions. There's a very long history of court cases to support all of this, and you'll win. And the employers need to understand what's going on here. So the conclusion of this is to stand up for your rights. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them make you knuckle under to whatever they're demanding. Because if they can get you to knuckle under and violate your own religious person, your sincerely held religious beliefs, then what else can they make you do? The truth is, most employers are simply ignorant of the civil rights and the law. They have two choices they could make. They could either choose to follow the law, or they can choose to go against the law. That's it. You need to inform them, educate them, and help others in your company. So employers who choose to violate the law will suffer the consequences. And the bosses and those involved with the violations will be personally held liable and accountable. All right, thank you for my presentation. Please remember to like and subscribe.